smartphones have had a tremendous impact on society, and the touchscreen iPhone has revolutionized the world of communications. This quote comes from Dao Yongjin's book, Evolution of Smartphone Technology, Putting Smarts into the Phone. A cell phone is a tool used in almost everyone's daily life. They have been around for about 45 years and have and will continue to change. In my informative speech, I will summarize how the idea for the cell phone was formed, why it was not created immediately, and how far it has come today. The idea of the phone being able to move with you had been talked about for a long time. The idea was somewhat new and easy to understand, though, because they had radio stations already being used by government and police officers. In the article, A Brief History of Mobile Telephony, The Story of Phones and Cars, Glenn Jessup states, quote, "The military and civil authorities provided a fertile breeding ground and in terms of experimenting with radio telephones," end quote. This meant that when more people joined the radio station, you were unable to hear over one another, and that was a big problem. So they wanted to create a way for each call to be on its own separate station, and no calls would overlap with each other. The Science Museum in England wrote an article called The Invention of Mobile Phones. In the article, it expresses, quote, "In the 1970s, researchers at Bell Labs in the USA began to experiment with the concept of a cellular phone network. The idea was to cover the country with a network of hexagonal cells, each of which would contain a base station. Bell Labs was a big part of the creation of the cell phone revolution, but they were not the ones who actually created the cell phones themselves. They wanted to create a way for each call to be on its own network, again, like I said before, so no call overlaps with each other. They also thought it would be nice to not have a cord following you around, like when you're on your landline at home and when you're talking, you get stuck because the cord runs out of length. Agar states in the article, Learning from the Mobile Phone, quote, "It was while working for Bell Laboratories that the US engineer with the fitting name of D.H. Ring came up with the idea for the cellular phone." This is an image of D.H. Ring working at Bell Labs in the early 1940s. D.H. Ring was an important part of the creation of the cell phone and would help Bell Laboratories create the idea for something new. Not many people, though, know his name because he was not the one to actually create the cell phone, he just created the idea itself. Now let's go back a few years to when the idea was first imagined and why the cell phone was not created until the 1980s. Quote, "The idea for a cellular phone was written down as early as 1947, yet the product did not take off until the 1980s, states Agar. Some people say this is because of the lack of advanced technology at that time, but some people think otherwise." Quote, "AT&T, the parent company at Bell Labs, had many reasons for leaving the plan on the drawing board. Technological development would be needed and other projects claim priority," states Agar. "The phone could have been created much sooner if AT&T had put it at top priority, but it was not at the front of their minds at the time. They had their demand and need for a cell phone was not high, so they waited until they had better technology and better stuff to create the cell phone. And they also had other projects that needed to be finished before they decided to create the cell phone." Quote, "Technologies are more than good ideas in material form. Their success depends on what people want, what people are allowed to have, and what sort of world they can have them in," states Agar. This quote helps explain how the world may not have been ready for this type of technology at that early of a time in history. Many people did not have nearly enough money to spend on a cell phone and needed to spend their money on more important things like groceries or other essential items. Quote, "AT&T, as the single largest telephone corporation in the early 1980s, planned to develop smart cellular phones," states Jin. "Finally, in the 80s, AT&T decided to start creating the cell phone. The cell phone creation was pushed back for many years. Once it was finally taken seriously, they created the first cell phone, shown here." In the book, A Constant Touch, John Agar explains, quote, "In early 1984, the company Motorola introduced the first handheld portable cell phone, the Motorola 8000, as shown in this picture here. It is much larger than the phones that we have today, and it also does not have a touchscreen like we have today. This phone was created by Martin Cooper and Rudy Krolop, who worked at AT&T, and it was only purchased by the rich. Quote, it weighed over a kilogram and was affectionately known as the Brick, as you can tell. But it quickly became a must-have accessory for wealthy financiers and entrepreneurs. This is stated by Invention of the Mobile Phones article. The video, The History of Mobile Phones, states, quote, few people own them, these cell phones, because phones were so big and expensive. These early models could weigh nearly 2 pounds and cost close to $4,000. This is a very expensive price at that time, especially because not many people were making that much money, and even today our cell phones are not $4,000, and that is just a large cost to pay for a phone that doesn't have all the technology we have today. Quote, at almost $10,000 at today's price, it was not for the ordinary telephone subscriber, states the Invention of Mobile Phones article. The first cell phone was huge and expensive. Compared to the first cell phone, the newest smartphones that we use are much different and more affordable. Quote, the touchscreen smartphone is a life-changing technology for many. All-in-one portable device that combines the functions of a cellular phone with the functions of a computer. This is stated by Jin. Cell phones have come a long way in 40 years and will continue to change. As stated by that previous quote, these phones have tons of other functions that the phones that we used to have do not have. They have things like applications, photos, camera, and many other functions as well. Quote, since it lacked several functions characterizing current smartphones, including the digital camera, people did not buy this less desirable cell phone. The role of consumers was not comparable to the smartphone users of today, who eagerly wait for and buy new models, states Jen. As my speech progressed, I gave a detailed summary of how the idea for the cell phone was created. I also explained the first cell phone and how it is different from the phones we have today. Now that you know more about how the idea for the cell phone was created, take the time to understand what goes into the cell phone you use and how it has changed from the first cell phones. This is my works cited, and thank you for listening to my